Greetings, I'm Dike Rostant. Welcome back to the TTT News. We are going in on two issues: a rearrangement of the hierarchy of careers. Think what makes a job essential, as well as factors that determine competence after a period of study. And for that, we are joined by CEO of the National Training Agency, Dr. Patrice Parris Searles. Welcome, Dr. Searles. Thank you for making the time. I want you to start off with an overview of the National Training Agency for us, please.
So thank you very much, Mr. Rostant. To appreciate what the National Training Agency is about, you need to take a step back, and if you can allow me to do so. Technical Vocational Education and Training, better known as TVET, or Skills Development and Workforce Development, is what the focus of the NTA is about. The NTA was established to facilitate, support, regulate, and coordinate all things TVET in Trinidad and Tobago. That means that the organization reaches out and collaborates with all the partners and players within the TVET landscape, whether those are public institutions who are delivering programs, private institutions, industries who are actually pulling on the output of those training institutions, or the clientele themselves, the young men and women who are having conversations about the next stage of their development. The NTA, therefore, does all the work and the policy development that allows for a strengthened, robust, quality-assured TVET landscape for Trinidad and Tobago.
And what are some of the unique characteristics about TVET programs versus traditional academic disciplines?
Traditional academic programs are often geared towards the delivery of a fixed set of knowledge and theory-based concepts. So a person will go into a subject area such as biology, so you understand what photosynthesis is, you can define theories, you can explain processes. In contrast, TVET, or skills development, looks at developing the competencies, the practical know-how skills that an individual needs to perform within the workplace. After our TVET programs, therefore, a candidate is able to graduate and get employment almost immediately, because the focus there is on competence and practical mastery of skills. Of course, it's complemented by knowledge and underpinning attitudes and stuff that would be required to reinforce what is done in the workplace. But by and large, it is a more practical focus initiative that allows for quicker uptake in employability among the candidates.
And I really love that, the way that you would have posited that response, Dr. Searles, because many times you hear two things, and I'll ask about them individually. One, you heard I go to law, best you go and learn a trade. That's one. And two, people coming out with a pretty piece of paper saying that they're bright, bright, bright like the sun. But at the same time, if they are in a situation that is not exactly fitting that cookie cutter mold that they may have been trained for, applying a little critical thinking isn't always the first thing that comes to mind. So you just gave us the difference between TVET versus more traditional programs. How do these things stack up? Where do they complement each other in terms of traditional academic disciplines versus trades?
Okay. So yes, like you, I have navigated this space for a very long time. And there's always this perception that once you are not good at learning and you're having difficulty, go and learn a craft. And therefore, TVET over the time would have gained this very negative persona that persons think that, it's only those who can't do better. And therefore, persons are always somewhat embarrassed to say that they are involved in a TVET program. But I think that as time passes, persons need to recognize that there was a point in time in our history when the backbone of our economic survival stood on those tradespersons. When they were launching things like the Point Lisa's industrial estate, we were drawing on persons who had competencies, practical competencies to build those plants and run those plants. I think that as persons appreciate that TVET can occur at any level. So yes, we have the flexibility that allows a candidate to come in with no formal education. And we will reinforce the practical work or the competencies and we will build skills. But that's just the entry point. TVET articulates to higher levels. Eventually, you can become a technician where you are now also being given the background information. You have to understand maths and English. You have to understand the rudimentaries of scientific principles that govern whatever the vocational area is. And then you can become a master craftsman where you're now analyzing and solving problems that oftentimes come with a huge bill if it is that something goes wrong in a plant. And you can continue to gravitate all the way up to having a university qualification because there are TVET universities out there in the international sphere. So I think that it's sometimes a false narrative to try to compare and contrast academic and try to stack them up one against the other. I think that there's a complement. The concern that persons have when you have a qualification and a degree and you come in and you cannot change a light bulb or you cannot splice a wire to just replace a circuit is where we think that the NTA's role is to advocate for that collaboration, that understanding that eventually what we are supposed to see are, yes, two streams, an academic stream and a vocational stream. But you should have those bridges and connecting points that allow persons to move from academia into vocational studies, as well as those in vocational studies to get the complementary knowledge that is inherent in academic work. And therefore they complement each other, not compete.
And I like the way that you would have said that or laid that out for us, because I think in being on that bridge between these two areas that some people think are black and white sometimes, apart from just being able to move from one position to the other, I think that also raises a level of respect when you see this person who is able to do this and you can't splice the wire. It's problems for you to change the light bulb, and you have respect for this person who is able to do this. And sometimes I think tradesmen, tradeswomen can even be enemies to themselves. You're so good, you make it look so easy, you make someone think that anybody could do it. But the way that you would have given that range in terms of those entry points for TVET programs, what is the largest cohort? Is it the person who is coming in at the university level? Is it the person who's coming in at secondary school? Where do you find the largest cohort?
Right. So, Mr. Rostant, the truth of the matter is that at this point in time, the largest cohort are restricted to the level 1 and level 2 of the vocational programs, because that is traditionally the narrative that would have been put out there. We have a number of TVET institutions and initiatives that would have been geared to the at-risk youth, the youth that we felt would have been undereducated and did not have competitive potential in the labor market front. And therefore, the government of Trinidad and Tobago over the years would have invested huge sums of money to ensure that those persons don't get left behind. Because we understand that each of those individuals represents a household. And they must have a fighting chance to feel included in the society and be able to survive, have a sense of pride that they are not overly dependent on handouts and the support systems of the country. So therefore, because of the large amounts of investment that would have gone into addressing that cohort, we continue to see that pattern over time. And therefore, vast majority of persons would be still today registering at the level 1 and level 2 courses. But because of the dynamic reality of the international market, and the world is getting smaller, and persons are seeing what holds elsewhere, and technologies that would have existed in other jurisdictions are now impacting our society. The reality is that there's not only a need for the elevation of TVET, but there's also a want. Many of the persons who would have originally started at level 1 and level 2 are now aspiring because they realize that it is doable. It may take them a little longer. They may have to be a flexible way of delivering the programming, but it can be accomplished. And as such, we see institutions, even in the national landscape, institutions like MIC IT, NASC, WITEP Limited, who are and of course UTT, we cannot forget UTT because they come from the history of John Donaldson and Sando Technology. You see that they have been making concerted efforts to elevate their programming for their same cohort. So they are taking persons now from the level 1 straight as far as the desire and the capacity is within their clientele. But that is still a work in progress. We're not seeing as many numbers there as we would like, but we continue to see positive movement nonetheless.
All right, so when we come back, I want to talk about some of the programs on offer, prerequisites to be accepted into the program, as well as the impact of the pandemic and work that has been done to adapt around it. But Dr. Searles, I feel a little way when you call John Donaldson, but you didn't call Sandotech, because I went Sandotech as well. But we talk about that when we come back. We're speaking with the CEO of the National Training Agency, Dr. Patrice Parris Searles. Stay with us. We'll return with more. Welcome back. We are going in depth on building a competent workforce. We're doing this with CEO of the National Training Agency, Dr. Patrice Parris Searles. And Dr. Searles, what are some of those prerequisites to be accepted into some of the programs that are on offer at the NTA?
The truth of the matter, okay, so on a point of clarification, the National Training Agency does not actually deliver training. What we do is we quality assure the training that is done in the other institutions. So we set down the criteria so that persons will know that once they have made the investment to get this training, that their competencies and their qualification will be worth more than the paper that it's printed on, that it will be accepted by industry and they have the highest likelihood of being employed. So the prerequisite really comes down to the program. As I would have indicated before, you can see TVET programs being offered throughout the landscape at all levels. From the unskilled person who's coming straight off the ground, there usually is an age limit for those persons and just the desire to stick with the program because it's rigorous. At the higher levels, at the level 2s and level 3s, you will see the introduction of at least basic maths and English, because by this time they are supposed to have some level of numeracy and literacy to begin to understand the principles governing the respective occupational areas. Of course, if it is that you're looking at enrollment in UTT, of course, and the other larger providers of higher education in vocational areas, they would also want to have some kind of prerequisites that is tied to academia. The good thing about the presence of the National Training Agency, through our collaboration, we have gotten institutions to also recognize that sometimes you can recognize what we call prior learning. The learning that would have happened informally while persons may not have been in an institution learning a skill, but they would have accrued some competencies, watching their dad doing it a couple of times for themselves, getting hired in a part-time option, and then building on the work and the learnings there. So institutions have now been able to subscribe to the principles of prior learning, assessment, and recognition. The NTA has a system of supporting institutions to allow them to look at candidates based on their work history and their past competencies and rank it somewhere in terms of experiential learning. So at this point in time, you are having institutions that are accepting persons with years of experience in a vocational area as prerequisites to come into the program. So it really and truly depends on the level of programming that the person is going after.
And before the break, you spoke about the world getting smaller. And I think there's also the conversation of what now defines an essential service. So what kind of impact has the pandemic had on the work of the NTA and the stakeholders that you associate with?
So the reality is that there would have been a lot of conversation happening over the years in terms of introducing more and more technology, more and more flexibility in terms of how we not only deliver TVET and skills development initiatives, but how we assess candidates. With the pandemic, persons were forced into revisiting almost immediately all their processes and the systems that they were employing in order to deliver workforce development. And while the pandemic has been very taxing and it's a scramble, it's putting a lot of pressure both on the mental health and the physical safety. I think that one thing that must be acknowledged and recognized and commended is that a lot of the institutions, NT included, immediately looked at how they would have been responded and how much of the digital tools that were available that can now be employed in the servicing of its clients. In the first iteration, of course, it was simply, okay, so we need to meet, go on Google. You need to teach us, stand up in front of a camera and start to deliver. But I think that now, as persons have gotten a little more comfortable and they have started to navigate what is available internationally and looking at what is on the social media sites and doing their own reviews, they are now understanding that it's not just to do the same thing that you were doing in front of a camera that says, okay, that's now online learning. It really comes down to partitioning the programming, making sure that there's a balance, that it's not too much, it's not too wordy, splicing it up with some dynamic videos. So it is really allowing the sector to take leaps and bounds that may have been a little bit resistant to many in the past. We don't have that option. We either evolve or we die, basically. So I think that in response to the pandemic, a lot of good things have happened.
And is this the sort of message that you would be pushing to your stakeholders on a consistent basis in terms of citing the need to promote competency? Because sometimes there are qualifications, but if you just rest on the laurels that you have, if you don't evolve, you're going to die, like you just said. So what are some of the ways that you and the NTA reach out to other bodies, people that you engage with and say, wait, we need to do this, we need to get better at this, we need to become a little more efficient at this?
The National Training Agency, through its system, we recognize very early that we don't have the resources or the institution, the intellectual capacity to do everything required to strengthen TVET. And therefore, through a number of partnerships that we have with both industry and training providers, we continue to advocate the message over and over and over. Within the next couple of months, what is going to be emphasized by the National Training Agency in response to the pandemic and in terms of messaging is collaboration. We no longer can do things in silos. We have to take a whole sector approach to all our initiatives. And therefore, we have a number of industry captains and stakeholders who have been consistently supporting the NTA in the development of its occupational standards. That is the set standard for various vocational areas. It tells us exactly what an employee is supposed to do once they're in a workplace. So industry has always been supporting us to generate occupational standards in a core section of economic areas. But now we need to bring industry and training providers closer together. So we are embarking on initiatives such as apprenticeship, looking at it in a well-formalized way to help institutions say, look, you cannot do everything in the classroom, you cannot do everything in the workplace, but let us find a way that we can collaborate and support one another so that we are able to generate a competent workforce. So the messaging is in every opportunity we have, whether we are talking to policy developers, whether we are talking to trainers and assessors, or whether we are talking to the users of the output of those training institutions. We are advocating that we have to collaborate because TVET is expensive. TVET is a very resource demanding investment in persons. And therefore, if it is that we share the burden, then we will be able to redound the benefits over time. That is our hope, at least in the NTA.
Thank you so much. And in the last minute and a half we have, you spoke about the impact of the pandemic. What has the National Consultation on Education done to inform the work that you are doing at this point in time?
So thank you for that question. The reality is that we have just come out of the consultation stage for the policy. And listening to the stakeholders during that exercise, as well as seeing what is articulated in terms of the strategic goals being outlined by our line ministry, it is very clear to me that the NTA needs to ramp up its responsiveness. The days of taking our time to formulate by all means remains necessary, but we need to fast track that because time is against us in many regards. And there's a need. Persons continue to insist that TVET has to represent a workable, feasible career option for many. And therefore, we have to submit to support not only the traditional areas, but start to innovate. Look at robotics, look at the digital transformation initiatives, and see if it is that we can support and ensuring at all times that it is quality driven.
All right, so we want to thank you so much. But just before we go, Dr. Searles, contact information, how can people get on to this wonderful opportunity that is provided right here in Trinidad and Tobago?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to put in a plug for the promotion of the National Training Agency. So we are all on all the social network sites, and the easiest way to get in contact with us is through our website, which is ntatt.org. And all our handles are related to NTATT, whether it's Instagram, Twitter. So you can contact us, of course. The numbers for the NTA, 672-7107.
All right, thank you so much once again, CEO of the National Training Agency, Dr. Patrice Parris Searles, and on behalf of the entire TTT team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you for joining us.